crashes, defective products, dangerous drugs, injuries, and abuse. Across the state of Alabama, the attorneys, proudly sponsored by the law firm of Hollis, Wright, are here to serve you. Your tough legal questions answered by our experts with host David Lamb and the attorneys of Hollis, Wright.
Hello and welcome in to the attorneys. Thank you for being with us tonight. Got a topic of conversation that will affect everyone. Trust me, that'll make sense once we get into the topic of conversation. This one affects all of us. But the ground rules before we get into our conversation, and the fellow who's leading the conversation tonight, want to remind you how you can be a part of this all throughout the program tonight. At the bottom of your screen are ways you can call, text, email. Also, attorneys from Hollis, Wright are standing by live as we speak at 844-LAW-TALK, 844-LAW-TALK. If you'd like to get some advice from an actual attorney standing by live right now, that's a free, off-air, and confidential conversation, and it's yours for the taking. Leading tonight's conversation is a partner at the firm of Hollis, Wright, Carter Clay. Carter, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, David. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. Thank you, sir. So real quick, because I do get these questions about the actual attorneys that are actually standing by, but actual Hollis, Wright attorneys are standing by as we speak right now.
As we speak, and they will be available to answer legal topic questions that you have. Obviously, we're a personal injury law firm here at Hollis, Wright, so that's really what's in our wheelhouse. But if anybody out there has a question that is outside our comfort zone, we will get you to an attorney that will answer the question, preferably probably on Monday morning, but we will get you to somebody.
Yeah, you guys, having done several hundred of these attorney shows, you guys do know some attorneys.
We do know
that
a few,
handle
yes,
just about
we do
everything.
know a few.
So tell me, what are we going to talk about tonight?
Yeah. So simply put, and I don't mean to be sarcastic when I say this, but really what we're going to be talking about are funeral services and burial services gone bad. And what are the family's rights when they find themselves in a situation where they're going through a funeral or a burial service for a loved one, very difficult time of their life, very emotional, and the service that is provided is not what they bargained for.
Right.
It's not what they contracted for. It's not what they thought they were going to get. And we've seen a lot of these types of cases over the course of the years, and depending upon the various facts and circumstances, they can be very compelling and powerful cases in front of a jury because of the fact that the family members are at a very vulnerable and emotional state in going through the funeral. And people just don't like it when you try and take advantage of people that are in a vulnerable position. And so they can be very compelling and powerful cases in front of a jury. So that's what we're going to be talking about, are things to do on the front end to try and avoid problems if you can. But if you find yourself in a situation with a funeral home and you did not get the benefit of your bargain, or they're doing something that is very egregious, what your rights are and how to go about exercising those rights.
Right. And this is one of those subject matters that's, it's not the most exciting, but it is something that if folks wait until that event happens, you'll be surprised at the number of decisions you're going to have to make. And so if you can be proactive about that, having gone through that with a loved one, who died kind of unexpectedly, and then you're faced with decisions and you're in shock and grieving and upset and really not in the best place to make those decisions.
Well, and it's like you said at the outset of the show, that this is going to affect all of the viewers. There's nobody out there that has not been involved or attended a funeral for a family member or a friend. So it really does affect everybody. And I think, David, that you kind of hit an important point as to why these cases can be so compelling in front of a jury, and that is that the typical time frame from death until funeral and burial is usually around 3 to 7 days after the death at most. And because of that, the family members are almost always in some level of a time crunch to have to make decisions if those decisions have not been made before the passing of a loved one. And a lot of people die unexpectedly. It's not always a situation where a person's in hospice care and it's only a matter of time, but you've got several days, if not 3 or 4 or 5 weeks, to make these types of arrangements. A lot of people die from heart attacks. A lot of people die tragically in motor vehicle accidents, which we handle a lot of those types of cases. And when that happens, the family members are not thinking they were about to have to plan a funeral.
Right.
And they are having to plan a funeral. They're in a little bit of a time crunch. And so that obviously adds a layer of anxiety in an already a very emotional situation. And again, it puts somebody in a very vulnerable state.
So what types of concerns should I have about dealing with the funeral arrangements of a loved one? What should we be thinking about?
Well, again, it kind of depends on the timing of everything, but the reality of it is obviously you're going to have to decide, is the person going to have a traditional burial involving a casket, or are they going to be cremated? And those decisions can kind of take you in a couple of different directions. Are you going to have a church service inside of a church? Are you going to have a graveside service? Are you going to have a service inside the funeral home? Most funeral homes have some form of a chapel there on site. So those are the types of decisions that you have to make. If you're going to have a traditional burial, there will typically be an embalming. Are you going to be buried in the ground? Are you going to utilize a mausoleum? So those are kind of the overarching issues or questions that people have to kind of address early on.
What sort of legal requirements or protections are there out there to protect me or viewers from being scammed by a funeral home? So
you've really got two bodies of law. There's federal law and state law that could apply to these types of situations. In the federal context, there's the Federal Trade Commission that has promulgated or passed 30 plus years ago called the Funeral Services Rule. And it lays out various rules that funeral homes have to abide by and follow. And you can find that on the internet if you go to the Federal Trade Commission Funeral Services Rule. If you just Google that on the internet, a lot of information will come up about what those various rules are. And then there's also various state laws that could apply related to consumer protection laws and those types of things. But there's also in Alabama called the Alabama Funeral Services Board. Okay. And again, you can find that entity on the internet as well, and it has a wealth of information that people may want to review if they find themselves in a situation or a conflict with a funeral home.
Under what circumstances might I find myself in need of an attorney relative to this?
Well, I think what I would always tell people is this: try and resolve any issues with the funeral home first. Or if you're dealing with a cemetery and there's an issue there, always try and work it out. It's best if you can work it out during the course of the process. I think where somebody really needs to consider hiring an attorney is if something has been done that cannot be undone. In other words, we had a case a long time ago involving two young boys that died tragically in an accident. They were not of the same family. One family desired for their son to be cremated. The other family wanted their son to have a traditional burial service, and the funeral home got it mixed up.
Oh, Lord.
The person that was supposed to be buried got cremated, and the person that was supposed to get cremated did not get cremated and was going to have a traditional burial. I think they even got embalmed. So obviously that's a permanent situation. Can't resolve that. That's a situation where you would need to go hire an attorney. But really what I would say is when you get to a point to where you cannot work it out, probably time to contact an attorney.
All right, time for us to step aside our first break of the evening. As we do so, a reminder about Hollis Wright and their activity on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, wherever you are on social media, they are. Just search the term Hollis Wright and you'll find them there on your favorite social media platform. Stay tuned, more of The Attorneys coming right up.
I'm Josh Wright with the law firm of Hollis Wright, a personal injury law firm, and thank you for watching The Attorneys. We hope you, a friend, or a loved one never needs legal counsel for a case. But if you do, the goal of the show is simple: to provide answers and legal counsel when you need it the most. Your call to the show is free and off air. So if you have questions specific to the show or related to other accident or injury topics, call, email, or text us. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube, or go to hollis-wright.com and click on the Contact Us button. We know your time is valuable, so thank you for spending it with us and watching The Attorneys.
The attorneys, proudly sponsored by the law firm of Hollis, Wright, are here to serve you.
When we started the show 8 years ago, my hope was we would be able to do what we do best, which is to help people answer real-world legal-related issues they have in their life.
People oftentimes are confronting various legal issues and problems in their lives that range across the gamut of legal practice areas. Bankruptcy, criminal law, family law, just to name a few. And to be able to have a 30-minute platform or format to where we can just cover various legal topics once a week, that's obviously the primary focus of the show.
Hollis Wright here all week for your accident and personal injury cases.
Welcome back in to the attorneys. Hey, just a reminder before we get back into our conversation tonight, the attorneys from Hollis Wright are standing by live right now. 844-LAW-TALK, 844-LAW-TALK if you want to take advantage of that opportunity to get some free, off-air, and confidential legal advice there. The attorneys from Hollis Wright here with Carter Clay, a partner at the firm of Hollis Wright, talking about kind of this area of funeral homes and funerals and how to deal with those end-of-life kind of decisions and when things go wrong, what to do. You touched on this, the funeral service rule, and that there are some funeral service rules. What are some specifics of those rules? What are we talking about?
Specifically, that rule was passed to try and address some of the problems that had been seen back in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. And like I said, it was passed in the early 80s. But I think it's important for people to be aware of kind of these rules. And again, I would encourage everybody who's in this type of situation about to have a funeral to go take a look at the funeral service rule in the Federal Trade Commission. But really what it involves is transparency that the funeral home has to have with the customer. In other words, we've all heard of situations where people are offered packages where you have to buy a package from the funeral home that might involve a casket and a whole laundry list of other service items. They're really not supposed to be doing that. You're really supposed to be offering sort of a la carte individual packages. There's supposed to be transparency in pricing. We've all seen commercials and ads and situations where they roll out and they have these beautiful caskets on display, and then they give you the pricing and the person says, well, I'd like this one. And then all of a sudden the casket that shows up at the funeral is not one of the beautiful caskets this one's on display. So there's transparency involved there. There's also rules, and honestly, I didn't know this until I was really looking at the production materials, but apparently you're allowed to even take your own urn. If you're going to get cremated, you can bring your own urn, and they're supposed to honor your request to use your own urn. You can even buy your own casket off-site. In fact, I learned Costco offers caskets for sale. You can buy caskets from Costco, and you can take your casket from Costco to the funeral home, and they're required to use those caskets. And so there are just a lot of little rules like that that I think are important for people to understand and be aware of. And I think it's also important always to interject this comment when we're doing the show. When we talk about medical malpractice, or maybe we even talk about legal malpractice, the vast majority of lawyers, doctors, engineers, and funeral homes are out there doing it the right way. 99% are good. They're providing an invaluable service to our community, and they are doing a great job. But just like there are bad lawyers out there and there are doctors who make mistakes, there are funeral homes out there that make mistakes, and sometimes it's not just a mistake. Sometimes it rises to the level of fraudulent type conduct. And if anybody finds themselves, unfortunately, in that situation, they ought to consider consulting with an attorney.
So that brings us to this question. What types of legal claims may I have against a funeral home that has wronged me and that necessitates me getting in touch with an attorney?
Yeah, so the facts really dictate the type of claim that you may have, but legally speaking, it's probably either going to be some type of breach of contract, because you're probably going to have some type of written contract or written agreement with the funeral home. So you may have a breach of contract. You may just have a negligence claim if they just made a mistake, but the mistake was permanent in nature, like the example that I gave before we went to the break. You might have a negligent claim, and then you might also have what's a unique area of the law called tort of outrage.
Okay.
And really what that is it's almost like intentional infliction of emotional distress. It's something that is categorized as an intentional act, or it's so egregious that the law is going to consider it to be an intentional act, and it's really just outside the bounds of decency. And just to give you an example of that, there was a case a while ago that I was involved in or knew about. It was really other lawyers at the firm that were involved in it, that involved somebody being placed in a mausoleum. They were embalmed and put in a mausoleum, and literally the embalming fluid was leaking from the body. And it started leaking out of the mausoleum spot and everything, and they tried to cover it up without disclosing it to the family member. They did all these types of acts that were really egregious instead of disclosing it to the family member. Ultimately, it was uncovered and a lawsuit arose from that particular event. But really what you're looking for is intentional conduct when you're talking about a tort of outrage or just really some egregious conduct. There's also been times where fraud plays a part. And we'll talk about that in a minute. I know one of the things you want to talk about are sort of the pre-arrangements that you can have, so I'll hold that thought. But fraud can arise in these situations as well.
If I file a lawsuit against a funeral home, what kind of roadblocks may be out there that I run into?
Well, obviously there are going to be defenses to any claim that you may bring that they didn't do anything wrong. But I think probably what you're driving at is in most of these funeral service contracts, there's going to be an arbitration clause. Those have become commonplace over the last 10 to 20 years. And what an arbitration clause means is that the customer is essentially waiving their right to have their case presented to a jury. Remember, I told you at the outset that these can be powerful and compelling cases in front of a jury. Well, if you don't have a right to go before a jury, who are you going before?
Right.
Well, you're going to go before an arbitrator. And an arbitrator is likely going to be a professional individual, maybe a lawyer. And the arbitrator is going to be somebody that sees a lot of these types of cases. Sometimes you may have one arbitrator, sometimes you might have three. It really just depends on the contract language concerning the arbitration. But it's been our experience that these cases are not as valuable in an arbitration setting. They're more valuable and more compelling if you can get it before a jury.
Also on here, having the correct plaintiff for the lawsuit, how is that often?
Well, so typically what that's referring to is obviously you've got an individual that passed away. Who has the right to bring a claim against the funeral home if things go awry or wrong and there's a legal claim to be brought? Typically, it's going to be the widow or the spouse that survived the individual that passed away. It could also be an adult son or daughter. You're really going to be looking at next of kin, and those would be the types of individuals that you would bring a lawsuit on behalf of. But it typically is also going to be the person that signed on the dotted line with the funeral home that made those types of arrangements. But really what you're looking at, and some of the obstacles is, who has the right not only to bring the lawsuit, but what are the damages that you can get? You're really going to be looking at emotional damage, emotional distress damages, and potentially punitive damages if you can demonstrate fraud or you can demonstrate conduct that rises to the level of that tort of outrage claim that I mentioned a minute ago. But that's what you're going to be looking for.
I would also think just the fact of rehashing the whole, you're going an emotional loss, a tough loss, something that's painful. And whenever you have to do the suit, you kind of rehash some of that pain.
Well, and not only you want finality when you bury somebody, and you're not getting the finality if it results in a lawsuit that you have a rightful place to bring.
Yeah. All right. Time to step aside. This is our final break of the evening before we wrap things up. So stay tuned. The final segment of The Attorney is coming right up.
I'm attorney Bobby Bell with Hollis Wright Law Firm. In today's world, social media is all around us. It is common for many people to post on social media regarding their life and activities on a daily basis. Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and similar social media are a great way to stay connected to others and to share your experiences and thoughts. Some seemingly innocent social media posts, however, can have devastating effects if you're involved in litigation, especially in a personal injury claim, a contested divorce, or a child custody battle. Courts regularly allow adverse parties access to the other side's social media accounts, allowing relevant posts to be presented as evidence. These rules have allowed social media to become a hotbed of information in the litigation world. In fact, we are seeing more and more preservation orders issued by courts requiring you to collect and save any and all social media activity. Therefore, it's advisable that even before there's litigation, lawyers should advise their clients that social media content may be discoverable. Here are a few helpful tips. 1. Do not post anything about the case. This includes posts regarding conversations or meetings with your attorneys, remarks about your injuries, negative remarks about the opposing party. Do not post anything you would not want read in open court to either a judge or a jury. 2. Avoid new friend requests from people you do not know. Many law firms and insurance offices may attempt to have employees follow you on social media in an attempt to gain information. 3. Limit adding new photos, check-ins, photo tagging, etc. Seemingly innocent posts may be used against you. Regular check-ins at restaurants, parties, or other events with friends can cast doubt on any claims of loss of enjoyment of life, pain and suffering, or emotional distress, since you appear to be living life as usual. 4. Increase your privacy settings. Many social media sites frequently update and change their privacy settings. In the litigation context, it is possible you may have to preserve and present anything you posted. Therefore, we encourage you to be smart and careful when using social media. Please remember, your call, email, or text to the attorneys is free. All of us at Hollis Wright want to help answer your questions on real issues you face. Remember, a competent lawyer will respond to every question you send in. That's our pledge and promise to you. Thanks for watching The Attorneys on WPTM 13.
Hollis Wright, here for your accident and personal injury cases all week long.
Welcome back into The Attorneys. Under 6 minutes remaining in the show. Those attorneys from Hollis Wright standing by live at 844 Law Talk if you want to get in touch with them. Here with Carter Clay, a partner at the firm Hollis Wright. Let's jump back into the questions. Sure. All right. So a question here. Is there anything that we need to know about, and we've heard a lot about this, but help us kind of understand, burial insurance and these pre-need arrangements?
Yeah, and those are pretty widespread. There are often a lot of companies out there that are selling burial insurance and pre-need arrangements plans. And I do think conceptually those are good approaches to dealing with the inevitable death that everybody's going to experience because the more preparation that you can have, likely the better off you will be. And a lot of times when people get older, they don't want to have to burden their children with all of these decisions at the time. Not only the decision making, but the financial aspect of it. Mm-hmm. And if you can pay money now to lock in a funeral that's going to occur 5, 10, 15 years down the road, conceptually that sounds like a good idea, and to some extent it can be. But remember, I told the viewers in the last segment, one of the claims that you can oftentimes bring in these types of situations when things go badly involve fraud. And what I'm talking about there is remember, you're purchasing something now for an event that is going to occur several years down the road. And you have to be careful about that, and you have to be paying close attention to the representations and promises that are going to be made. And let me give you an example of a case that I personally handled several years ago involving one of these pre-need funeral arrangement plans that were purchased. It was a lovely lady. She was up in age and she wanted to take the burden off of her family members. So she went out and purchased a pre-need funeral arrangement plan. And the pictures and things that they showed this lady, and she wanted to be in a mausoleum. I mean, they had these beautiful mausoleums laid out. It looked like the botanical gardens where she was going to be laid to rest several years down the road. Well, she wound up living maybe another 10 years, and then she passed away. The family members take the pre-need plan, they go to the funeral home, and all of a sudden they realize they literally had one mausoleum with like 12 spots that was in an open field. No flowers, no plants. It was not even close to what the pictures represented to her 10 years ago of what this would look like.
Right.
And so things evolved from there. They wanted to get a refund. They didn't get a refund. It just became a very contentious situation, ultimately led to a lawsuit that we handled on their behalf. And one of the main claims that we had was a fraudulent misrepresentation claim because they really didn't have the funds or any intention to build this great mausoleum and landscaping that they had promised. So that's what you have to be careful about.
Got to watch out. Just about 3 minutes remaining, so pretty quickly, what do I need to know about cemeteries and burials?
So the cemeteries are owned probably going to be owned by the cemetery itself. I mean, it could have a mortgage on it, a loan, and things like that. But what people need to understand is that when you are buried in a cemetery, you have property rights to that burial plot as well. You have an easement over that property where the individual is buried. So it's not as if you don't have any rights at all. The concerning part about it is that this is a pretty heavily unregulated area involving cemeteries, and sometimes there are situations where the cemetery is unkept. It's dilapidated, it's run down, it's not nearly as nice as it was 10 or 15 years ago, and there have been lawsuits that have arisen from the poor maintenance of these cemeteries. In fact, Jefferson County, I think, now has a board that oversees and addresses problems like that within cemeteries.
Just about a minute and a half remaining, but just time enough for a final thought from you for viewers relative to tonight's subject matter.
Yeah, I think preparation is the key. Obviously, there's situations where people die unexpectedly, not a situation where people have a lot of time to prepare. But if you have time to prepare, if you've got a loved one that is an older person of advanced age, where they're getting sort of near the end or you suspect it, I think the preparation is the key. Hashing out and ironing out all of those issues on the front end will help out tremendously. And I would also reiterate the point that I made earlier, which is communication is the key with the funeral home. Just because there's an issue that arises, don't immediately run out and hire an attorney. Try and resolve the issue with the funeral home. Try and get the benefit of the bargain that you think they've made. They will typically work with you. They understand the vulnerable position that you're in. They understand the emotional strain that you are under. The last thing that they want to do is have this thing go badly. But again, the problem is everybody's kind of in a time crunch.
Right.
Because once you get to the funeral, I mean, it's not like you can postpone it.
Right.
I mean, you're going to go forward with the funeral, and if it's not what you thought you were going to get, it's really hard to correct that at that point. But I do think communication is the key.
All right. Carter, thank you, sir.
Thank you, David.
Appreciate
Enjoyed
the time. Me as well. Thank you so much to Carter Clay and all the folks at Hollis Wright who are on the other end of that phone line when you call 844-LAW-TALK, 844-LAW-TALK, the way to get in touch with Hollis Wright. We appreciate you being with us as always. Thanks so much, and we'll look for you next time right here on The Attorneys.
Thanks for watching The Attorneys, sponsored by Hollis Wright.